Hi everyone, welcome to this video which is basically a commentary on the best shortwave portables I've used in the past 8 years. I got back into DXing in 2015, having done a lot of that when I was much younger, as a very young child and a teenager, and then you know what happens, life gets in the way. Work, family, etc., and you just find in the end you run out of time and you do less and less listening, and eventually you don't do any at all. In my case, that resulted in me putting my Sangean ATS 803A receiver in the garden shed for 20 years, only to then spend quite a lot of time resurrecting it when I got back into the hobby. But since 2015, which is basically when I started the channel, purchased a lot of shortwave receivers, mostly portables, too many probably, if there is such a thing, which means that I've got a lot of experience in using the older models from primarily the 80s, 90s, and then obviously the more recent models that have come on the market. Now, there's far less choice these days when it comes to buying shortwave portables. You can't buy any of the Japanese made models anymore, Sony, Panasonic, etc. They just don't build this stuff anymore because, well, since the Berlin Wall came down in around 1990, shortwave has been in decline, and there are parallels here with my last video on the decline in the broadcast stations on the long wave band. But same goes for shortwave. Having said that, there is still a lot out there to be copied on shortwave. But anyway, in the last 8 years, I've purchased a lot of radios, many of them secondhand. So I've got experience with using many different types, probably over 30, vintage up to present day. I've also got experience in using radios for the purpose of writing reviews. I've written quite a lot of articles for Radio User magazine, and they cover various different portables, from the Belka DX, which is an excellent shortwave portable. I've written articles on low-cost DXing, so using radios such as the XH Data D808, etc., amongst others, and ultralight DXing, which is basically where you essentially using a portable and not much else, and off you go, and try to copy DX stations with essentially a non-expensive, non-complex setup. So the opposite really of what you've got in the shack. If you go into my shack, there's a lot of desktop radios, high-end SDRs, etc., big antennas, mag loops, all that stuff. And you need all that stuff because in the 21st century, the QRN, the local electrical noise, electrosmog as some call it, is ubiquitous, and you need magnetic loops, and I use galvanic isolators to reduce, to lower the noise floor, etc. But one thing that I learned when I got back into radio, so the landscape for signal to noise had changed completely when I kind of gave up DXing on a regular basis sometime in the 90s, as to how it was when I returned in 2015 was signal to noise. The noise floor, particularly in my old QTH, could be as high as minus 95 dB. I mean, I'm lucky in my new QTH it's much lower. But when I first started the channel, and I was copying some DX, it wasn't without background noise and a compromised signal to noise. And it was another YouTuber, a German guy, and his YouTube channel, I think, is DX 1963. He said to me, you've got two options. You can either go out into the countryside with a modestly priced portable and hear stuff, or you can sit at home with expensive antennas, expensive receivers, noise mitigation equipment, etc., etc., and probably hear less. So that message got home, to me, and that's really what catalysed my then starting to go to the local woods nearby that I used to refer to as the DX Woods, take a portable and sometimes 100 metres of wire, set up a temporary listening post, and captured way more DX and much higher quality DX out in the woods with the portable than I ever did at home with an expensive desktop receiver. And that is really what drove me to buying shortwave portables, and as the years went by, more and more. So, what are the best shortwave portables that I've used in the past 8 years? Well, I'm going to start with the Eaton Satellite Grundig Edition. I got this radio in January 2017. It had been out a while, maybe a year by the time I got one. I wasn't going to buy this radio because it had been reviewed by a couple of other YouTubers, and no disrespect, but I'm not really sure they gave the radio much of a chance. They both gave it fairly poor reviews, and for that reason, I was unsure. But then I saw another YouTuber using this radio, and if I remember correctly, he had a very long wire attached to it. I mean long, like hundreds of meters long. I think that's what the setup. And I believe he copied one of the Mongolian signals on it, on longwave. And I thought, wow, if that radio, even with a very large antenna, that's pretty impressive. So I bought one of these radios. I think I actually got it for Christmas. And took it out, and I thought, well, the best station to test this radio with is when ABC Australia used to be on 90 metres and 120 metres Northern Territories, and I went out and copied ABC Northern Territories on a very low HF frequency, and then I knew that this was an excellent radio, and it proved to be. I took it to Brazil with me on several trips, copied huge amount of DX on this radio, very, very sensitive. It had the tendency to overload, but selective audio bandwidth filters. I like the design. It's slightly avant-garde design with the kind of sort of negative contrast display, and yeah, it was my go-to radio for quite a long time, and sideband. It was basically an excellent shortwave portable, and I wasn't anticipating it to be because of the negative reviews. Certainly one of the best portables I've ever used, and still highly recommend it now. So that's the first one, and if you can get hold of one of these, don't hesitate. It is superb. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Right, so the next one is actually similar, is this, and a lot of you will be very familiar with this radio. This is the XH Data D808. And what some of you will know and some of you won't know is internally this is basically the same radio as the Eaton Satellite Grundig Edition, which explains why it's a superb performer. When this radio was first introduced, now I got mine in 2018, and again it had been around for a while. It had excellent reviews. Again, very, very sensitive. I can remember picking up, I think, Radio Club de Para on 4885 kilohertz with this radio, just using the telescopic. I think I also copied Voz Missionaria on one of their HF frequencies. These are South American kind of regional shortwave stations that don't run huge amounts of power, and copying them on the telescopic, this radio, massive sensitivity, very, obviously similar to the Grundig. And obviously audio bandwidth filters, are selectable, sideband, etc. Just a brilliant radio. And when they first came out, I think they were about 60 quid. I think I bought my first one for about £60. Took it to Florida, copied a lot of DX. Took it to Brazil, and ended up blowing something up. I was in the jungles of Brazil, in northern Brazil, in Para, and it was at the time of year when there were a lot of electrical storms, a lot of rainstorms, and I had it attached to a sort of mesh wire fence, during electrical storm. Now, there wasn't any lightning nearby, but you could almost feel the static in the air. And anyway, when I got it back into my shack, I'd lost audio through the loudspeaker. Still audio through the headphone jack, but through the loudspeaker. They're so cheap. I did take it apart whilst I was in Brazil. In fact, that's a picture of it apart on the desk in my little room I had in the jungles of Brazil, just in case it was something silly like the speaker wire had come off or something. But no avail. I ended up buying another one. But superbly sensitive, selectivity, sideband, tinny audio, even more so than the Eaton. The Eaton Satellite, the audio was slightly tinny, but it was so sensitive. The Eaton, and the same goes for the XH Data. That for the money, easily two of the best shortwave portables that I've used in the past 8 years. The next one is the Texan PL880. This trio of radios have very, very similar performance. The PL880, very, very sensitive, in a similar way to the XH Data D808 and the Eaton Satellite. The difference with the XH Data, with the PL880, is the quality. This is a quality radio. The feel of the controls, the ergonomics of this radio are much better than the Eaton or the XH Data, and just the resistance on the coarse and fine tuning, the volume. The PL880 and audio on this radio also much better audio than either of the two previous radios. But in terms of absolute performance, very similar. All three radios are very similar. And where the Eaton Satellite, followed by the XH Data, had become my go-to radios, the PL880 then became my go-to radio. And I took it far and wide. It went to the United States. I took it to Australia actually, and I can remember hearing Shannon Volmet in Brisbane on the 20th floor of a skyscraper, the hotel I was staying at. I had taken the Bonito Megaloop FX antenna with me, which is basically a mag loop but with a cable, flexible cable, and I had most of it hanging out of the window about 20 stories up, listening to Shannon Volmet. I also copied Radio Vanuatu on this rig, and it became my go-to radio for travelling until COVID hit early 2020, when I basically stopped travelling for work. But until then, the PL880 was a radio choice, and highly recommend it now. When the 990 came out, I couldn't really understand the reason why you would buy one. Apparently the performance was very, very similar, and just the quality of this radio and the audio. So this is a radio that you can use for the Xing, but it's also a radio that you can use to listen to Radio 5 Live, or listen to Radio 4 on long wave on 198 kilohertz, which is what I still do with it now. It's still my go-to radio to carry around the house. I just don't travel very much anymore. But a bit more expensive than the other two. Probably 2-3 times as expensive as the original price of the D808. But a very, very high quality radio. Excellent display. Obviously selectable audio bandwidth filters, sideband, fine tuning. The fine tuning on sideband on this is excellent. And yeah, as I said, just one of the best radios that I've used in the past few years. Let's go back a few years to the legend that is the Sony ICF 2001D. This is the radio that replaced the original Sony ICF 2001, which came out in 1980. I have one of those radios, as some of you know. When I was a small kid, a shortwave radio looked like a Binatone Worldstar or a Zenith Transoceanic, basically analog radio with a world map, time zones. And then I was out in Oxford one day with my parents, and I saw a Sony ICF 2001, the original from 1980, in a shop window, and it kind of blew my mind away. I was like, wow, I have to get one of these. Now, of course, I could never afford it, didn't get one until many years ago. The radio that replaced that was this, the 2001D in Europe, known as the 2010 in the United States. You'll all be aware of this radio, so I won't go into too much detail on it. It was a big improvement over the 2001, more sensitive. This radio had synchronous detection, lots of features that have been discussed a million times before. I bought this radio in October 2015, so it was only a few months after I started the channel that I thought I need to get a 2001D. I think I bought this radio around about the same time as I bought the Yaesu FRG 8800 desktop, which was another radio that I wanted since I was a kid. And I bought this radio, and it was a complete eye-opener. It was so sensitive compared to the Texan PL360 I was using. And the synchronous detection circuit on this radio, as far as I'm concerned, is probably about the best that there's ever been. You kind of tune through the signal, and it will automatically detect and lock onto either the upper or lower sideband. On the previous three radios I've been talking about, you can forget about synchronous detection on those radios, as you can. Nearly all modern radios don't get sync right, but synchronous detection on this radio is absolutely superb. I still have it. I still use it from time to time. It's large for a portable. It can be complex, particularly if you want to sort of run scans of bands or portions of bands, etc. But at the time, this was the best shortwave portable anywhere. Up until that point, this was easily the best shortwave portable radio, and particularly in terms of sensitivity and selectivity with the synchronous detection. I got it, immediately loved it, copied a lot of DX with it. This was the radio of choice for spies for various countries. I can think of at least two. There was a female spy working on behalf of Cuba, spying for Cuba from the United States. She used one of these. There was a Belgian spy I think was spying for Russia. But anyway, apparently this radio was the radio of choice for spies to tune into whatever number station and get their instructions via a one-time pad. It's a legend, this radio, and as I said at the time, the best shortwave portable to date. Has it been surpassed? Possibly, but I'll come on to that. I still have mine, and still going strong. Whereas my original 2001 has died, the 2001D still working perfectly well. The LCD display has dimmed a bit over the years, but still legible. Still easily one of the best shortwave portables that you could buy now if you were to either buy a new radio or second-hand. This radio is right up there at the on the pinnacle of what of what's available in terms of performance for a shortwave portable. So if you've wanted one and you can get hold of one via eBay or wherever, Facebook Marketplace, if you get an opportunity to buy one of these, I highly recommend you do, because they're also robust in the way that other very, very high-end shortwave portables are not. These things go on for years. You might have to have the capacitors replaced. Mine's good, touch wood, but beyond that, they are very robust. I think there's an FET in the front end that potentially can blow, but otherwise, these are robust radios. And yeah, one of the best. I still use mine now. I've had it 8 years, and it's a keeper, and I'll never get rid of it. So that says it all, really. Yeah, even the even the box, the picture on the box. This is the box that this radio came in, and even the graphics on the box are epic. I've always thought that for this particular radio. The next one I'm going to talk about is the Panasonic RFB65. This radio was released in 1989, so 4 years after the Sony. And the reason this radio's in here is because in terms of sensitivity, this radio is as sensitive as the 2001D, which is saying something, because at the time that was the most sensitive radio you could buy. The difference with this radio is that it was a lot smaller. It didn't have synchronous detection, and it didn't have adjustable audio bandwidth filters, but what it did have was sideband, and an amazing radio. I bought one based on reputation, had it a few years, I eventually sold it because I just didn't use it. And I'm sort of now sat here wondering why did I do that? But what you had here was basically a smaller version of the 2001D with minus a couple of features, but it was so sensitive, and the lack of adjustable audio bandwidth filters could be compensated for using sideband. These, in the way that the 2001D has kind of cult status, has sort of legendary status. The Panasonic RFB65 has this, has the same sort of following. Lots of people still love this radio. I also had its little brother, the RFB40, which was also very sensitive radio, but didn't have tuning steps on that radio were limited to 5 kilohertz, which kind of made it a bit useless really on a crowded band. Although I do still have that radio. I got that I think in about 1989. But the RFB 65 cult status because it's simply so sensitive. In a quiet band, anything you can hear on the Sony 2001D, you'll hear on this radio, and that's why people love it, and they still do, and they still pay top dollar for this radio. So I sold mine. I do this a lot. Buy a radio because I want it, love it, use it, then don't use it because I've got so many, end up selling it and then regretting it. But hey, we've all been there. The next radio I'm going to talk about is another Sony, and that is the ICF SW77. This radio was basically the replacement for the 2001D. And it was brought to market in 1991. Now, the 2001D was launched in 85, but you could still buy it about 15 years later, until around about 99. So imagine a piece of consumer electronics today being available unchanged for about 15 years. Unbelievable. But around about the time of the ICF SW77 coming out, which was about 1991, for 7 or 8 years after that, you could buy both of these radios, the 2001D and the SW77. The SW77 is also one of the best shortwave portables of all time. Just about as sensitive as the 2001D. Synchronous detection that is excellent. Works slightly differently to the 2001D, but still one of the best synchronous detection circuits that have ever been made available to the market. A large radio, different styling, I guess, reflects different tastes, and the fact that I'm sure the 2001D was in the Sony Skunk Works in the early 80s, and this radio was developed several years later. It's got the sort of jog shuttle type dial on it. I love this radio, and there's a story to tell actually. Believe it or not, one of my early YouTube subscribers, I won't name him, he can name himself if he wants to, he actually gave me this radio. He'd had it a few years and said that I want you to have it, you'll use it to its capability. I want to see this radio down at the DX Woods being used properly, and he gifted it to me. I mean, what a generous person he was to do that, and I'm still in touch with him. It was almost overwhelming to be given this radio. What I did was, I think at the time I had a Texan PL680 which I sent to him as a sort of thank you. Nowhere near equivalent, but I gave him that radio, and I believe he still got it. But the SW77 was essentially a replacement for the 2001D, and I would say, almost as good, as near as damn it that it makes very little difference, the performance of this radio in terms of sensitivity. It's, again, you've got the wide, narrow audio bandwidth selectivity on this radio as you did with the 2001D, as Sony used to do with their portables years ago, a kind of page system where you can save stations into memory and actually add a sort of new add a tag to them. A brilliant radio. Again, has it got cult status? Not quite, but people still love this radio. It's still recognised as one of the best ever, probably just behind the 2001D. but very, very close. I did test them a few years ago, and the 2001D came out on top. But there's absolutely no doubt that Sony, before Apple, there was Sony. If you wanted quality, you bought Sony, and at the time, they were the biggest name in shortwave portables, and everything that they touched sort of turned to gold. And this was another one, really. The SW77, a legendary radio in my mind, although maybe not in everybody else's, as I've said. But the name is legendary. The performance, so similar to the 2001D as doesn't really matter. I got mine in 2016, so I've been DXing for about a year when I was given this radio, and still love it to this day. It's if you can find one, and they are available, they do come up on eBay, etc. Again, I wouldn't hesitate; I'd buy one. So let's move on to another large portable, the Eaton E1. If there's any radio that has legendary status, cult status, that is loved, it is this radio, the Eaton E1. Arguably, this is the best shortwave portable of all time in terms of absolute performance. I've owned one. This was it, and I sold it. And there's a story to tell there. Why did I do that? Even today, I'm not sure really. But this radio has garnered a reputation as probably being the best of all time, just pipping the ICF 2001D to the crown. There's a couple of reasons for it, really. But this radio, for me, my experience with this radio starts actually with the Perseus SDR. So when I got back into radio and started the channel, an older guy, he wanted me to. He had the Perseus SDR, which is, by the way, one of the certainly one of the best SDRs of all time, as far as I'm concerned. He wanted me to have it for the similar reasons, really, to that the guy wanted me to have his SW77. So he sold it to me for like 200 quid, which at the time was an absolute bargain. And I used it, and it was brilliant. And had it 2-3 years, can't remember, 4 years. Again, I eventually sold it because I stopped using it mainly because of the software. I preferred the ELAD FDM SW2 software, but I sold it. But he sold me the Perseus on the basis that if I was to sell my E1, that I had to sell it to him. So I agreed, thinking, well, that's okay because I'm never going to sell it. But then after a couple of years, he started, every now and then would email me, are you thinking about selling the E1 yet or not? And I said, no, not at the moment. I kind of felt bad, really. And in the end, I sold him. I did sell him my E1 for, I think I sold it to him for 550 quid. Bearing in mind, I bought the E1, I got it off eBay for I think it was about 250. I mean, they go for way more than that now. But I did sell it in the end. But anyway, back to my ownership of it. I bought it and started using it, and it became quite clear that this radio was as good as people were saying. I had a look through the Passport to World Band Radio, if you look through editions of that, they're talking about this radio, in very, very positive terms, always getting excellent reviews, regarded as, one of the best ever or the best ever, and that was my experience of it. I think what made it better than the Sony was probably the passband tuning. Ultimately, I think it also, the synchronous detection was superb on it. Passband tuning just gave you that extra kind of level of isolating wanted signals from unwanted signals or noise. I think probably it was very slightly more sensitive in my experience. Not much. The difference between this radio and the Sony 2001D is similar to the difference between the Sony 2001D and the SW77. There was not much in it, but with passband tuning, it had superb audio. Probably this was the number one, and I had one, and as I said, in the end I did sell it. I think I would have to concur with the sort of general view that that this radio, the E1, was probably the best of all time. If you look back through, as I said, editions of the Passport to World Band radio, they spoke of it very, very highly, which makes it such a shame that the reincarnation of this radio, the Eaton Satellite HD, turned out to be such a damp squib. Very expensive. Was it over $700? All sorts of problems with it. I would have been tempted, if people had been buying this radio and the feedback had been superb, I'd have been tempted to buy the Eaton Satellite HD, the reincarnation of it, but I'm hearing the quality so poor. I'm not even sure whether it's actually being sold right now, because the feedback on purchased examples have been so poor, which is a shame, denigrating the reputation of the original E1. It is a shame. There's no doubt about that. One thing about the original E1 that I will say actually is that they did have a reputation for being not exactly robust. The original used to suffer from problems with the display screen, and then there was that rubberized coating that Eaton put on their radios, which after a few years in the sun would kind of like start to become very sticky. It was sort of, I think the original, it was the process of it disintegrating. It would become very sticky, and then you need to use all kinds of solvents and stuff to remove this sort of sticky coating. Mine never actually suffered from that. The screen was perfect, and the never suffered from this kind of stickiness in the outer coating. So I was really lucky. I'm still sat here now wondering, well, why didn't I get pushed into selling it? Hi. The Eaton E1, a bit of a legend. If you can buy an original in fully working order, my advice would be jump to it. Absolutely no doubt. But they're rare as Rocking Horse do these days. Right, next one, the Sony ICF SW100. This little radio, absolutely brilliant. Came out in 1995. I got mine, I think, in November 2015. So one of the earlier purchases. I got it because when it came out, I loved it, although I wasn't really back into radio then. And the thing about this radio is that it's tiny. It harks back to the original Sony ICF SW1, which was about the size of a packet of cigarettes. This is even smaller if you take it out of the case that it comes with. There's a sort of screw in the back that you can uncase it. It's smaller than a packet of cigarettes. But the way that Sony miniaturized the electronics with this radio, it's got synchronous detection, sideband. And the synchronous detection on this radio works as well as it does on the SW77 and the 2001D. Sensitivity on this radio is up there with the 2001D and the Eaton E1 and the Panasonic RFB65. I can remember actually recording a video years ago, basically making that point that this tiny little radio has got the equivalent sensitivity to the 2001D. It has to be one of the best portables of all time. Completely different, of course, to the bigger radios, but absolutely superb. Even that it's got a tiny little speaker, you can hear it, not in a crowded room, but it does. It will overload if you put a very large antenna on it. It's designed to use with an active antenna, so you can't plug a passive antenna into it, which is probably the only drawback. So you have to clip a wire to the telescopic. There probably is a workaround for the active antenna jack, but I never bothered with that. But I picked up and recorded a lot of DX with this little radio. Highly sought after, not massively expensive. The ribbon cable used to fail. You can see mine's got the little slot in the hinge, which is basically the Sony's reworking of a known fault. The ribbon cable that connects the base to the lid used to break, but that problem was solved. I used to have two of these actually, and I sold one. I've still got this one. One other failure point is the spring inside the little battery case used to be so powerful that in the end it would break the plastic, and the battery case lid would break, and mine's broken. So I use an elastic band now to keep the batteries in, which is a bit of a shame. But yeah, overall performance, sensitivity, selectivity, just a brilliant little radio. When I used to use it a lot, I'd plug it into my Bose speaker to improve the audio, and yeah, just a brilliant little radio, and certainly one of the best I've ever used. So there you go. So what about those portables that miss the cut? There's a few, and that is coming in my next video. There's pictures there that you can see. Well, there's 4 for a start that missed the cut, and I'll go into that into some detail on my next video. But you know, there's probably others as well. I mean, you're looking at the Texan H501X, the Sangean ATS 909X2, the Belka DX, the Sony ICF SW55. You're looking at those radios, and some of you will be thinking, yeah, I agree with him. Others might be thinking, I don't agree with that. So that's that'll be the content and the purpose of the next video. So anyway, there you go. That's it. So those were the best shortwave portables that I've ever used, or certainly in the last 8 years. Well, ever really, because prior to that, I'd only used the ATS 803. Sangean and the Sony ICF SW7600G. So yeah, these are my best shortwave portables of all time, as far as I'm concerned anyway. Some of this stuff's subjective, so I'd be interested to hear whether people agree or disagree. But you know, I only have to go with my experience, and obviously in the last 8 years I've spent a lot of time listening to signals on portable radios. So and I'm looking forward to explaining why some of the radios that you would imagine would make the cut haven't, and should have done but didn't. So that's I'll look forward to doing that as well. Anyway, I hope that was interesting, maybe useful. Thanks for watching, and 73.
At 1520 Zulu, wind 210 degrees, 10 knots. Wind varying between 190 degrees and 250 degrees. Visibility 10 kilometers or more. Clouds few at